Well, welcome to another webinar for the Northumbrian Coaching Federation, Forum rather. So I'm just going to pass you over to Stewart Brown, who's our speaker tonight. And Stewart.
Great, thank you very much, Nancy. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come along and speak tonight. My name is Stewart Brown and I'm based in Skipton in North Yorkshire, so not a million miles away from Northumbria, but thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to spend about 15-20 minutes talking about Freud and coaching. My interest in Freud and the broader psychodynamic school of which Freud forms a part was piqued during a coaching psychology postgraduate diploma, and then I'm studying with PB coaching at Leeds Beckett Uni. I found it's very, very interesting, and it added a whole new dimension to my coaching business. And just very briefly, what I do under the banner of Stewart Brown Consulting is actually executive coaching as well as consulting, particularly businesses and individuals going through transition and change. So, what has Freud got to do with coaching? Well, what I'd like you to do is to find a couch. I'd like you to lie down, close your eyes. I'm only joking, because this is what people, I'm sure, think of when we start talking about Freud. It's the first image that comes into people's minds. That classic psychoanalyst, like, the psychoanalyst who's asking these probing questions about relationship with your parents. That is not what I want to talk about. But what I do want to do is to try and stop you from lying back and closing your eyes and falling asleep. So I'm just going to share the screen now, and hopefully this will work. There we go. Okay. So I'd like to start with one of the key concepts that Freud actually came up with. And this idea really that there's a massive amount of the unconscious that sits below the surface. And this sort of metaphor of an iceberg that I put on screen is a really nice way to describe it. So right at the very top there, which a little bit peeking over the top into the conscious, but also dipping down to the pre-conscious, we have the ego. Now, the ego, Freud felt, was the reality, what we know, what we are experiencing, and what we think we are experiencing in the here and now. Over towards the left bit of the iceberg, which also kind of goes into the conscious, but also through the pre-conscious, and the vast majority of it is down in the unconscious, is the superego. And that is typically formed through identification with parents or with strong cultural influences that have brought us up. Now, quite often, that superego actually translates into the inner voice, which is often harsh and critical. So the inner voice that says, "Oh, I'm stupid, I can't do this," or "I should be doing this," or "I shouldn't be doing that." That might typically be evidence of the superego, or at least the superego making an appearance in the conscious. And last of all, we've got the id, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of that iceberg. Now, the id is entirely habits the unconscious part of the psyche. And what Freud felt was that the id was the place where your instinctive drives sat. So drives around libido and aggression. And those instinctive drives translated through to needs that needed to be satisfied. Now, the id and some of the stuff about Oedipal complexes and his sort of obsession with psychosexual kind of drives and stuff is probably the one area where Freud has been criticised very much, or a huge amount. And it does appear a bit anachronistic, I think, now. And he was really quite kind of focused on sort of women in particular, and this whole idea of hysterical women. So it doesn't really sit very naturally, that bit of the whole bit of Freud's model. But there are some interesting things that we can pull out and are still relevant today. Now, why are we talking about this difference between the conscious and the unconscious in this three-part form of the personality? Well, what Freud felt is that, in effect, there were competing voices, if you like, competing thoughts between each of these different areas. And what would happen is that these would lead to...
Hi, Mispa. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, Mispa. It's Stewart. I've just started in about 5 minutes, so I'll just carry on. Hopefully you can still hear me. Give me the thumbs up if you can hear me. Oh.
I'll just send Mispa.
I'll carry on. Maybe he's muted. Or maybe muted. Okay, anyway. So what Freud felt is that there were, in effect, different competing voices, different competing influences that actually resulted in anxiety. And he felt that we all had anxiety at a particular level. So, for example, that superego inner critic says, I should be working harder. I should be finalizing that website of mine. I should be working more on my business. But the id, that instinctive drive might go, you know what, I just need to kick back and relax. I need to watch the TV. I deserve this. Those competing thoughts and drives results in some type of anxiety and tension. And what Freud felt, and he actually developed this concept further with his daughter, Anna Freud, was that we build up these defense mechanisms, and the defense mechanisms are a means by which we can cope with the underlying anxiety, and really to stop that anxiety creeping through and manifesting itself and taking over. So, as I said, they are there really to cope with what sits within us all, which is anxiety. Now, many of these defense mechanisms have actually become really very popular and well known. So let's talk about a few of them. Things like repression, denial, rationalization. They're all phrases that actually, I suppose are a testament to the strength and the simplicity of these ideas. So repression is all about, putting it to one side, really thinking about something else instead. Denial is a bit similar. Rationalization is trying to find a logical reason for why you're feeling a particular way. These are all explanations and examples of defense mechanisms. Now, not all defense mechanisms are actually bad. Some of them can actually translate into extreme strengths and actually get us to great situations. So defense mechanisms are generally unhelpful and harmful to our situations somehow, but they can actually be incredibly helpful as well. Now, before I move on, just to talk about some of the ideas of some of the other psychodynamic thinkers, I just want to quick talk about transference and counter-transference. Now, transference was another concept that Freud came up with, and initially, let me first describe what transference is. Transference is the idea that someone you're with actually transfers or projects their feelings and emotions, which they have from an unconscious place, onto someone else. A classic example is you're in a situation and that other person reminds you of someone from your childhood. It can be a parental figure, it could be someone else. So transference in the setting of a doctor-patient relationship, or let's talk about a coach-client situation, is typically where the client starts to transfer feelings that they have and thoughts and unconscious feelings that they have onto the coach. Now, of course, in Freud's case, it was onto him as the doctor. And what he actually said and felt was that this actually gave some really interesting insights into the unconscious of that individual. And so he actually used it as additional data to then help understand and help explain with that situation, with that individual, why they may be saying or feeling that particular expression or emotion. Now, countertransference, as you think, or as you'd imagine, is sort of the opposite of that. It's when the coach or the analyst is the one who is feeling emotions or picking up sensations based on what the client or the patient is actually feeling or saying. So this little cartoon here is talking about, "Doctor, I have a difficult childhood," and the doctor there is bursting into tears because they're feeling very sad and emotional about that, because perhaps they had a very difficult childhood themselves. Now, in a work setting, how can transference make an appearance? Well, someone who may respond to a particular boss who uses a command and control style of leadership might be unconsciously responding to that person in the same way as a dominant or aggressive father or parent. In effect, they are treating and responding to that boss as if they were his father. So initially, Freud kind of recognized this and thought it was interference. It kind of got in the way of the therapy. But then he realized that actually that this was the anxiety. It was tension leaking out. And so you should really be able to use that information. So in my example there about the kind of boss, instead of ignoring it, a kind of classic Freudian approach would be for that coach or analyst to question what it was about the analyst that provoked the response in the patient. So, for example, if in a sort of coach or doctor setting, someone who's responding in quite an aggressive way to you, putting the question back to them. So what is it about the question I've just asked you? What is it about my behavior that is bringing up this aggression? That is beginning to unlock some of the unconscious, perhaps some of it is in the pre-conscious or conscious, but mostly it's unconscious feelings. So transference and countertransference are really important in the psychodynamic approach, and I'll talk about them a little bit more later. So Freud and his followers sit very much in the psychoanalysis school, and I guess central to that is this concept that we all have this universal blueprint of psyche. And it's the job of the analyst to actually interpret the patient. And acting as an expert, they cure that patient. I'm just going to talk very quickly as well, just in passing mention about other people within the psychodynamic school. So if Freud was at the end of the 19th into the 20th century, he was kind of followed, his ideas were developed on by Winnicott and Fairbairn, who was the object relations school, and then into the interpersonal space, which is a guy called Harry Stack Sullivan that I want to talk about a little bit. Now, he was a really interesting American psychiatrist who worked with schizophrenic patients. And if Freud can probably be called about intrapsychic. So he said, essentially, Freud was all about examining what was going on inside that patient's head. What Harry Stack Sullivan said is, look, you can't talk about this in a purely theoretical sense because we live in an interpersonal world. You can't separate the person from the environment. So it's through interactions with people, including interactions with the doctor or interactions with a coach to a client, that is how you can help people understand themselves a bit better. And then I suppose finally in this sort of timeline is attachment theory that Bowlby developed and has been developed massively subsequently. And this is off the back of research done of children during the Second World War and subsequently who were separated from their parents. So it's really, the sort of common theme here is that there is some sort of early influence that impacts both emotionally and cognitively individuals, and that these things are then played out through the rest of their life. It distorts or somehow has quite a unconscious impact on the way that people behave and the way that people think and have emotions. So, right, I've done a lot about history here, so let's talk about how we can apply the approach of psychodynamic to coaching. Well, here on the slide, I put 3 kind of key assumptions behind that approach. The first one is that there is always stuff that's going on below the surface. So whenever you're dealing with anyone at all in a coach-client situation, there is something that's going on. I put up a quick quote here from a scholar called Brenner, who said, "In the mind, just as in the physical world, nothing happens by chance, and every psychological event is determined by what has gone on before." In other words, how people are behaving right now has been impacted hugely by what's happened in their past and subsequently. The second key assumption is that this sense of distortion, so a thinking error or thinking distortion, is likely to show up in the relation between the coach and the client. And that is something that's useful and something to be worked on. So here I'm talking about transference and counter-transference. And finally, there is a very sort of positive, active role of the coach to actually identify and work with the client to overcome that distortion. So this may involve quite a directive approach. It's not a classic non-directive approach that many coaches and many schools of coaching have been promoting. It can be quite challenging and confronting as well. So there are 3 key assumptions, and we'll come back to those in a little bit. Right, so before I get on to some of the risks around it, well, how does it work in practice? There's a great book that's been written by Katherine Sandler that I've put on a reference at the end of the slides, but I'll just kind of put it up on screen here. You can see that. It's called Executive Coaching, a Psychodynamic Approach. And what Katherine Sandler does is she says that she approaches every single client-coach relationship, not only with the 3 assumptions in mind, but she's looking for data in which to form what she calls a working hypothesis. So there could be a number of different data points that she's using in order to be able to start to think about this working hypothesis. So, for example, in a sort of corporate coaching session, there may have been a 360 feedback. There may be information that's supplied by line managers, part of appraisals, and of course, most importantly, through initial contact with a client. So doing your initial meet and greet sessions, however you want to describe that initial one, but just finding out information about that individual. And so what Sandra does then is to start to think about what might be some of the issues that are lurking below the surface, and she calls those the working hypothesis. She effectively looking for clues in the past that may be showing up in the present behaviour of that individual in the work setting. So one challenge might be perhaps, well, how do you get someone to open up? I mean, it certainly isn't like Freud, lying on a couch with the coach sitting out of sight, asking loads of strange questions. But in order to get that data, there are a number of different ways of doing it. And Katherine Sandler and also another author called Charlotte Beck talks about exercises like asking a client to bring in photos, significant photos from their past. Perhaps even drawing pictures about where they are in relation to different parts of their family. Perhaps even just describing significant events during their life, asking people just really to start at any particular point in time. I've heard of one person also who uses a technique of asking someone just to open up their purse or their wallet and just to talk through the contents in there. It's really just to get a sense of the past of the individual without making it a very sort of analytical therapy type of situation. Another incredibly important way to help people to open up, in addition to some of those devices and exercises, is of course those absolute cornerstones of all good coaching practice, which is building the rapport, having massive empathy, unconditional positive regard for clients, all those key themes in order to help someone to feel safe to be able to start to talk about things that perhaps they wouldn't normally do, particularly in a work setting. So, once data has been obtained, then, how do you go about reading people? Well, one author compares the psychodynamic coaching approach as being a bit like a detective, a bit like Sherlock Holmes, looking for various clues or data, looking for patterns, then to form those working hypotheses. And those clues may be discernible, on an obvious level. So someone might be displaying anxiety. They might be visibly distressed. They might be in tears or showing some type of emotion. But if it's not on an obvious level, it might well be on a less obvious level, just anxiety leaking out as opposed to really sort of gushing out. And I'm reminded of Amy Cuddy's excellent TED talk on body language, which, if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic actually. But what Amy Cuddy talks about is actually, we all think we're brilliant at being able to spot liars when people are lying to us, but actually we're all pretty useless at it. And what she thinks is that research has shown that the reason why we're useless at it is because we pay way too much attention to what people are saying, the words that people are saying, as opposed to what they look like, their body language that runs alongside those words. So, for example, in a coaching context, a client could be talking about what may sound like what may sound like in a completely fine, a very stressful situation at work, that individual is saying, "Oh, it's fine, I don't have a problem with it." But you may actually notice that their face or their neck is reddening, that the shoulders are getting very tense, they're avoiding eye contact with the coach. They could be getting short of breath. These are all clues that there's something not quite matching up to what they are saying. There's something really going on under the surface. There's a psychiatrist called Schultz, and I'll put a reference to him at the end of this talk as well. And he describes it as almost like a tonal shift in music or in a film. There's some slight shift where, if you're really paying very close attention as coach to that individual, using all those great listening skills, you really, there's something that you just pick up that isn't quite right. And it's having the courage then to explore that further. One really quick worked example. How it might work in an executive coaching session. So a client, let's call him John, he volunteered to join a coaching program based on some junior colleagues' feedback that he was abrasive and superior with them. So despite the clear evidence of the anonymised feedback from his colleagues, which John had received, he refused to accept the feedback. Instead, he claimed that many of the junior colleagues had actually sought him out for help, and he started getting quite animated in the coaching session, defending his position. Now, a preliminary working hypothesis could be that John was actually in denial about the true nature of his behaviour and the impact he had on his colleagues. Clearly, you wouldn't go straight in there and saying, "John, you're in denial," in a very sort of aggressive, confrontational way. But by actually gently working around that idea and encouraging John to explore the hypothesis as a possibility, what actually turned out that John was able to consider his behaviour from a more objective perspective. And actually later sessions revealed he'd worked with a series of very aggressive and dominating bosses, and John had picked up and felt that this was the way to succeed. And actually a deeper conversation also revealed that his father had been quite forceful and dominating as a child. So gaining this insight enabled John to acknowledge and then work hard on an alternative approach, which was actually noted, and progress was really appreciated in later 360 feedback. So a really quick snapshot into how it might work in practice, although of course there's lots that leads up to it and lots subsequent to it. I want to talk and acknowledge some risks that you may be thinking yourselves, but certainly I thought about, and I think they're very valid risks, and then move on to how some of these risks might be mitigated. So, so risks, I mean, is this really all about therapy? I mean, the world of psychodynamic, I mean, it definitely came from psychoanalysis. So really, is this something that should sit in therapy and doesn't have a place in coaching at all? Well, I guess in a sense, it does cover, well, this approach does cover some similar ground to therapy. You know, some of the deeper stuff, some of the stuff that goes beyond, below the surface. But one key distinction is to ask whether someone, your client, actually has the resources to resolve that inner conflict, to resolve this issue themselves. And if they do have the resources themselves, then coaching, you know, as we know, is a possible and appropriate intervention. But if the person doesn't have the resources, then therapy is more likely to be the right type of intervention. Now, the second risk I put here is saying it's risky being stuck in childhood. Now, some criticisms that I've read about this particularly highlight the fact that if you're asking people to think about perhaps where the original source of tension might have been, or you are asking people to remember sort of childhood events or influences of in their childhood, then in effect you're kind of regressing them back to that state. And in a way, you're encouraging them to using childlike resources in order to be able to cope and try and deal with what may be an adult problem in their working context. And I think there definitely is some validity in that. And Catherine Sandler acknowledges it in her book. And what she says is, look, using coaching, keep the setting as much as possible in the adult working context. So going back to the example I gave about John, there are lots of circumstances, for example, the previous domineering and aggressive bosses that John had experienced, which were very much in the adult world. So rather than try to encourage someone to inhabit a child's mind and looking at the situation in the past through childlike lenses, it's to try and identify where some of the anxiety and some of the tension may be sitting, but moving that person rapidly into more of the present, more of the adult state, in order to be able to help them examine it with an adult mind and with adult resources. It's all about the client, not the coach. So this is the kind of risk that people might think about when using countertransference in particular. So if you as coach are sitting there and you're getting some pretty strong feelings and some thoughts and in response to what your client is saying, there could be a number of different reasons for those thoughts and responses. But rather than just sticking them all to the back and to one side and saying, that's my baggage, that's my thoughts, just put it away, you could actually be connecting on a very deep, instinctive and psychological level with your client, based on the sort of deep empathy and the situation that you've constructed, the safe space you've constructed. So really, merely ignoring those feelings and those thoughts that are coming through, they are effectively ignoring a potential additional data set that could help you with that, with your formation of an initial working hypothesis, then to discuss with the client. So countertransference is something that I think, and I've certainly read about, is something to be used with skill, and it does have it. Excuse me. It does have its detractors, but the risk of actually losing some important data probably makes it worthwhile. Certainly, in my opinion. The last risk I've identified here is, how do you avoid jumping to conclusions? So you may think, okay, there are 20 different Freudian defense mechanisms that they've come up with, more or less. Okay, I'm looking for the first bit of data that bam, okay, it's all about denial. This person's clearly in denial. The risk is that you then close off your listening from all other types of possibilities and data that exists there. You're jumping straight to that conclusion. You may even be suffering from the negative effects of countertransference. Oh, I've seen a client like this before. I remember that client had similar problems. Bam, in you go. You're closing off important data. You're not listening properly. And that is absolutely a risk. So it is keeping that good listening up. It is making sure that you're looking at this individual. It is all the kind of, again, the cornerstone skills of that wasn't a Freudian slip, by the way. Cornerstone skills of coaching in order to be able to filter out the stuff that is the good stuff and putting the stuff that may be just unhelpful interference to one side. Mitigants. So acknowledging that there may be some risks here of a psychodynamic approach, I think that there are at least 4 ways to practice this in a way that significantly mitigates those risks. I think the first one is right up there, and I suppose is common with all other types of coaching styles and schools, and that's self-awareness. You've got to know as a coach what buttons are pressed, and you've got to be, work on yourself. In effect, you've got to work on yourself to ensure that you recognise when some of the information that you're receiving perhaps stimulates a line of thinking that is just entirely about you and really isn't, or could not possibly be about your clients instead. So that may be a little bit of inner voice, but it's something that we all know can be quite tricky at times, but it's something that with practice definitely develops. Working on self-awareness, and in fact, a lot of the psychodynamic coaches recommend that if you want to practice in this area, then actually going into some type of therapy yourself in order to be able to work out some of those touch points, in order to then be able to cast those to one side. They recommend that as an approach. I put here secondly as contracting. So very clearly speaking with the client, helping them to understand what type of coaching technique, what may come up in a coaching session, being very clear right at the very front. But I think it's also important, contracting is an ongoing process. It is not just a one time when you're getting the client to sign on the dotted line. I mean contracting in the sense that it was developed really in transactional analysis, which is constantly checking in on the progress and performance of both parties, of both you and the client. So how am I doing as coach? Is this working for you? That regular checking in, which I put there as a third bullet point. The last one, and I think this is the most important one, is around collaboration. So this is not about psychoanalysis where it's the expert saying, I'm interpreting your dream and you have X. And by you being aware of X, you've got a chance of you being cured. This is about a co-created collaborative relationship. It is about using the expertise of the coach through listening skills for looking for patterns, through knowledge of the kind of psychological level, to come up with possibilities, working hypotheses, which they're not real until they're actually owned by the person, by the client themselves. So it's could it possibly be, is there something about that type of introduction to the ideas, as opposed to saying, I've got you, you're blob. So collaboration here is all about, it's an open discussion and working together. So the coach may come up with suggestions that actually the client goes, no, it's not that, or it's kind of that, but, oh, is it more like this? Yes, that's it. So it's very much a kind of collaborative approach rather than an expert sitting out of sight like a psychoanalyst. Okay, I think that is plenty. I've run over my allotted sort of 20 minutes or so that I thought I'd be. I put on here some recommended reading that will be on the slides, which I think will be shared later on. And I'm happy to take any questions or feedback or thoughts that you may well have.
Yeah, I think the thing that would worry me a bit is that, you know, you would potentially, someone really needs therapy and you wouldn't pick that up. You know, how would you say, actually, you know what, this person needs counseling or a therapist rather than a coach? You know, how would you say, actually, let's, I think there's someone that could, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point, Nancy, and I think I suppose it's possible in any coaching relationship, I guess. So it's something that we all have to be alert to. I suppose that the risk is greater in a kind of psychodynamic approach because of the encouragement to delve a little deeper.
Yeah,
but that absolutely has to be at the forefront of the mind. And you know, the approach that, as I've looked at it and practiced it, have been more in a work setting as opposed to you know, more of a sort of life coach type situation.
Yeah.
And I think that also kind of helps mitigate the risk of there being some really deep-rooted, very difficult issues there. But you know, if they do make an appearance, just as in any other type of coaching, it's a conversation to be had with the client and you know, do you think this is the right intervention? Is this really working for you? And having a conversation with the client to find what might be a better or an appropriate situation to go forwards.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nancy, you finished there. I think the sort of thank you for that, Stuart. It was really informative. Actually, I thought the three key words that I picked up actually was interactions, trust, open up, safe place, and collaboration. Because I think one of the key things as a coach is, although we are professional coaches, we're not experts in a particular, we don't come across and try and perceive as an expert and this is how it should be done. It's about interacting with them and getting people to open up and talk and working, as you say, to the client's agenda. There are sort of key things that came out for me. I think the actual business about going into the childhood, I've got a very good friend of mine who's an excellent coach, and he always likes to start with, you know, and I can't remember the phrase exactly, but he sort of says, you know, tell me about the boy who was 8 and I'll show you who the man who is 40 years of age. And I used that technique once and something really did come up for somebody which I didn't feel I was, again, expert. I didn't know, it was funny, you know, I didn't think I was qualified to deal with that at the time. And so I skated around it, and perhaps that was something that I should have just listened and talked around and let the person, you know, discuss it. But I was really nervous and I moved straight on to the adult working a relationship that they had. And I once worked with a hypnotherapist, an excellent lady again, who worked with a group of us. And she often talked about the ages that between 7 and 14 are big influences on your life. And everyone went into an issue. Excuse me, sorry, that's my phone that shouldn't be in this room. And she particularly, all of us, 8 of us, we went into an issue that was affecting us today, and in a group hypnotherapy, we all came up with something that was happened, but at those age groups. And I'm not so sure about, I think it has a massive influence, there's no doubt about it, your environment and your history, but sometimes being fixed on a particular age. And I think all the influences you have as an adult have just as much an effect on us as a child. Obviously, a childhood extremely so. So I think what I suppose I'm saying there is they definitely have an influence. It's good to listen to them, pick up some clues from it, but not be too transfixed on, oh, that is definitely the cause. Because what I found with it, when I did my exercises, I went back to that age. I kept thinking, why did I do? Oh, that's the reason. And I focused too much on it. It made me stuck. It got me stuck a little bit, actually. So I think it's just having an open mind, collaborating, and I think it's a coach has good questions that allows you to free yourself from that particular issue, and you think, oh, maybe I hadn't looked. It allows you to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, I think is the answer.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, if they are talking about something, it allows you to give them a fresh pair of eyes on that situation.
Yeah. No, look, I acknowledge that there may be situations, like the one that you experienced. And what is interesting is that I suppose 2 of the recent authors on particularly psychodynamic approaching in executive coaching, both of them have been or are psychologists, and I think one of them at least was a psychotherapist, a practicing psychotherapist before branching out into this particular bit of coaching. But both of them do say, look, with training, this is something that doesn't need years and years of counselling or therapy training. It is an approach that can be used with caution, appropriately, without the need to have specific therapy skills. I think the thing that I take away from it most of all, I would never describe myself as a psychodynamic coach, but there's certainly aspects of the psychodynamic approach, like there are aspects of Gestalt or transactional analysis, or other things that you can kind of take together to go, this is incredibly helpful. And I'm really drawn by the working hypothesis idea, because I think it can really help unlock people. As long as it's not that, directive, this is you, I'm putting a finger on you, I've analysed you as expert, I know what you're about. I think that collaborative, I'm noticing some stuff here, it's strange what there seems to be a dissonance between your words and, what's been put in the 360 or the way your body language is. That sort of thing, helping someone to explore that, which may well then unlock some slightly sort of deeper issues that are going on, some bits of tension or anxiety, and helping them to explore that. Because I very much believe that increasing self-awareness is definitely the first step towards helping people realize whatever potential and help them to clarify whatever way of distorted thinking may have been holding them back. So I think a gentle hand, in a very sort of collaborative way, and it's good you picked up on that word in particular, Carl. I that's something that really appeals to me about this approach.
Yeah, I suppose it's a matter of kind of how you do it and how you choose to do it, and you have to be aware of not jumping to conclusions or saying, oh, I know what's wrong with you or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if there's a tool like in an executive business coaching, you say, oh, I've used this and it helps, and you can bring that in. That's it. This is more about being really in tune with your senses, and really what Frank talked about, the provocative therapy, is being his clients. You say, you're a mirror. I look at the mirror and I see myself in you. And so what you're really saying a little bit is you're providing a mirror to the client a little bit.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, to be clear, it's not just about using your own senses. I think using your own senses are an incredibly useful tool, which I think probably more experienced coaches are more familiar with, and not scared or intimidated by, actually. So, and it's, what are those sensations that are coming through? What are those thoughts? Well, some of them are, what Freud would call counter-transference. They are things that you're responding to or thinking about, emotions and thoughts that are stirred in you in response to that particular situation. And some of them may actually be a form of what's called the somatic resonance, a bit, almost like you're picking up on the sensations, the anxiety of that other individual. So it may not be just your thoughts thinking about that in response to that other situation. It could actually be that you're kind of tuned into the way that they are thinking. And therefore, by noticing those feelings yourself and playing them back to the client, it may help them address those particular feelings themselves.
I think the other thing is that when you are going into the history as you speak, if you like, or you pick something up while they're talking about history or whatever, is that you're not just there. You're not a quick fix, and meaning that you suddenly jump to the conclusion and think, this is what I think this could be. It's just really, again, going back to that collaboration.
Yeah.
And I suppose being very careful of their space, as you said, resources that they have, and doing it in their pace. I think pace has a lot to do with this. I think when you're in this area, pace is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Tommy, you talked about Gestalt. How do you spell that? Because you touched on it and you've mentioned it to me before, early conversations about, is Gestalt any relevance to this, or is it something completely different?
No, it's not. It's just me name dropping,
Okay.
It's revealing inner anxieties about my, my competence and credibility. So it's me name dropping.
That's very honest of you.
Gestalt is spelled Gestalt. It's a German word, and it's a whole different ballgame. But I happen to have wrote my coursework for my postgraduate diploma, comparing and contrasting psychodynamic approach with Gestalt. So I'm interested in both those areas.
Okay, right. Well, I've just seen the message from Nancy there saying we need to wrap up for 7:30. And Stewart, I just want to thank you a great deal, really, for a very, very interesting topic and very thought-provoking, I must say. And some tools there, well, not so much tools, but a lot of thinking that when we're working with clients, how we can get the best out for the client, if you like. I think that's been really, really informative.
Great. Well, thank you for asking me again.